Okay, so in a compound we have atoms in this definite proportion. Why do they stay together? How do they become a compound? Well, in a compound the atoms are held together by chemical bonds. If we're thinking in terms of Lego blocks, you might think of supergluing the Lego blocks together. They're stuck and they're not going to come apart easily. So the chemical bonds result from attractions between charged particles. There are electrons and protons within the atom. And the electrons and the protons of the separate atoms are going to attract each other. There are two basic types of chemical bonds. There are ionic bonds and covalent bonds. An ionic bond will occur between metals and nonmetals. And this is going to involve the transfer of electrons from one atom to another. So it's the transfer of electrons. If one atom loses an electron, what happens to the atom? It becomes positively charged. The more electrons it loses, the more positively charged it becomes. Those electrons have to go somewhere. There's no electron bank or shelter where you can just drop off unwanted electrons. They have to be passed directly to another atom. So another atom is gaining electrons and it becomes negatively charged. It becomes an ion. Now you have a positive ion and a negative ion, and opposite charges attract. And so they're going to stick together a lot like magnets stick together. So the metal becomes the cation, the nonmetal becomes an anion. And we get this attraction between the opposite charges, electrostatic attraction, and the result is an ionic bond. Ionic compounds generally form some sort of a lattice, a regular three-dimensional array. So all these positive and negative charges are going to kind of stack up. I hope I have a picture. There's a picture. They're going to stack like this. So to maximize the attraction between opposite charges and minimize the repulsion between different charges. Here we have sodium metal, and here we have chlorine gas. The sodium can transfer an electron to the chlorine. When it loses that electron, the sodium becomes a sodium ion, Na+. When the chlorine accepts an electron, it becomes Cl-, and then there's this attraction between these two. The properties of sodium metal and chlorine gas are very different from the properties of sodium chloride, which is table salt. I don't advise eating sodium metal. It reacts violently with water, and your saliva is mostly water, so that would be a really bad idea. And yet we put table salt on our food every day. The other type of bond is a covalent bond. And this prefix co means sharing. So covalent bonds involve sharing of electrons. Ionic bonds, transfer of electrons from one atom to another. Covalent, they're going to share. This happens between two or more nonmetals. What kind of ions do nonmetals like to form? Cations or anions? Positive or negative? Negative. Nonmetal, negative. They both start with N. The nonmetals want to gain electrons. And so you get these two nonmetals together, and they're not going to make an ionic bond. Because one says, hey, give me an electron. And the other one says, no, you give me one of your electrons. And nobody's willing to be the positive. Okay? They both want to be negative, and negatives are not going to attract each other. So the only way that nonmetals can form bonds with each other is through covalent bonds sharing the electrons. So those covalently bound atoms caused by sharing the electrons form a molecule. And those compounds that have covalent bonds are called molecular compounds. Compounds formed with ionic bonds that are composed of ions are called ionic compounds. Any questions?